Hey guys, welcome back to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host, as always, Steve Hall, and today I have Dr. Pak back on the show, and we tackle some thought-provoking questions that challenge our understanding of science and its impact on our fitness journeys. First, we'll be diving into an intriguing topic of why some people seem to discount science and whether they have any valid reasons for doing so. We'll examine the complexities of this issue, seeking to understand the roots of their skepticism, exploring whether there are any instances where this is a healthy thing to do and is warranted. Then we'll explore the notion of whether science can truly provide us the perfect prescription of sets, reps, RAR, all that good stuff. With scientific findings often being used for marketing purposes, we'll address the concerns of cherry-picking data and making misleading claims. Moreover, we'll examine how individuals without formal scientific education, like Dr. Pak, attempt to interpret research papers and how consumers can become more discerning when faced with scientific information. Aspiring to be evidence-based is commendable, but we'll discuss the pitfalls of relying solely on abstracts and conclusions before drawing those overall conclusions. I then get Dr. Pak to share some insights into things he's changed his mind about over the years due to research and his experience. This part of the episode might very well surprise some of you. We then discuss the potential pitfalls of rigid adherence to standardized practices and the delicate balance between providing clear structures for progress while not forsaking individual stimulus for growth. The aim here, as ever, is to empower both our listeners and coaches alike as we navigate through the dynamic landscape of science, critical thinking, and how that applies in practice. As a side note, if you are a coach and you're looking to elevate your game both physically and intellectually, we might have exactly what you need here at Revive Stronger because we are online coaches ourselves and we work mostly with coaches. We believe that to be the best coach, you need to lead by example. That's why our program focuses on not only getting you in peak physical shape, but also empowering you with the best knowledge and expertise to take that forward with your own clients. You'll get a personalized program tailored to your specific goals and needs. Our expert coaches will guide you through challenging workouts, nutrition plans, and ensuring you get the desired results, but that's not it. We understand the importance of continuous learning. Our unique approach goes beyond just physical aspects. We are here to answer your questions, explain each change that's made to your program and why, so you can develop a better understanding of the coaching process and apply that with yourself in future and also your clients, so you can transform your physique and build your knowledge. If you are interested in all of that, it's linked in the bio as always. That's our online coaching. You can book in a consultation with one of our coaches. And with all that said, without further ado, let's get into the chat. Hi guys, welcome back to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host, as always, Steve Hall, and today I have Pak back on the show, Dr. Pak. I think this is the third time you've been on the show, is that right? You might know better. I should know better than you really, but I'm pretty sure it's the third time.
I was going to say that I should know better than you as well, but I'm pretty sure it's the fourth time, because it was one was a solo on deloads, one was with Milo on science communication or something. Yes. Third one was with Milo and Dr. Mike on ROM, and fourth time is a charm, as we say here in the UK.
Yes, I completely forgot the one we did, you guys, so yourself and Milo, talking about science communication, which I thought was fantastic. And obviously lots of people tuned into the roundtable on ROM, which was great. And obviously the deload one too. And I just thought you're someone who I like to keep up to date with in terms of everything you're putting out on social media. It's entertaining, but also informative. I like the perspective that you take. Some of the kind of things that you also mentioned in some of the previous podcasts I also really resonated with, and I wanted to dig into that more. So it's great to be back on here and talking to you. And I guess we can dig into the first kind of subject or question, which was talking about, obviously, people who follow you on social media, I mean, they follow the podcast. They know you're Dr. Pak. Science is near your heart. And some people really like to discount science, especially within bodybuilding, it seems. I guess it's not right to say science wasn't around like back in the day, like old school bodybuilding, like bro science kind of then led and leads the science now in some ways, but people still like to discount it. New studies will come out. They won't keep up to date with it. They won't let it inform their practice. What do you think about that? Do they have a leg to stand on? Do you think it's wise to ignore? I'm kind of setting you up there. What do you think about that in general? Kind of where is science for the kind of bodybuilder out there, someone trying to improve their physique?
Yeah, for sure. So allow me to start by saying shots fired. by Mr. Steve Hall. I'm just taking the initiative and starting beef for you by you. But joking aside, I think that what has happened is that people look at science and practice as two things that are somewhat mutually exclusive. And science has, and that's not only because of the sports science side of things, but because science in general is more widely communicated, and because science, although is not supposed to be an absolute answer for things, often gets presented as such, and scientists are held on a pedestal and are treated as experts that are supposed to have the absolute answer to everything. Then what happens is people see science communicated wrongly, then they create a caricature / false version of science in their head of what science is, and then they go against that because it's nice to have things to go against. And I think that's why people are essentially against or hate science when it comes to bodybuilders or advanced trainees who are, who have been in the field or in the trenches for many years. If they were to sit down with myself or with Milo or somebody else who, like yourself, who loves lifting and is also, going through hard workouts and values experience as well, and does talk to other coaches and coaches themselves, and they sat with us and we said, look, science is not meant to be the answer, but rather it is supposed to give us some general guidelines or give us some answers to some questions and guide us in the right way. I think they'd be like, oh yeah, I can totally see that, and I accept that. But when you see headlines like, I don't know, an example would be study finds deloads are impaired gains. Like Menno had made a post about that, and that's no shade thrown at Menno because he uses those titles to lure people in. But like, if you read the actual description of the post, he does mention the terms and conditions of the study that he critiqued. But I think people see that and then they're like, oh, they have this caricature version of science in their head, and they go, oh, here come the scientists again, that they're going to tell us things that we've seen in practice work, that they don't work. And what do they know? It was just a bunch of undergraduate students and so on and so forth. So I think that's why I think bad science or badly communicated science is something that is bad in general. But I think that's what people are against, and in that case, people do have a leg to stand on. Science in general, if somebody was to come out and say, yeah, science has nothing to offer to, a bodybuilder or a powerlifter, then that's just plain silly, because there's many things that we currently know work or don't work because of science, specific supplements or specific dietary interventions. For example, we know that, hey, a low carb approach is not superior to a higher carb approach for fat loss. And that's because of science, because it would be very difficult to draw inferences from just looking at anecdotal evidence or from experience, because a low carb diet can also be good, can be fine for fat loss. So trying to see if one is better than the other just by observing changes in people that we work with or ourselves, we may be dealing with too much noise there. Or even, training. Like recently, we've been hearing more and more about training at long muscle lengths. For me as Pac, as a coach, or for you as Steve, as a coach and as a bodybuilder, to say, it would be very unlikely that you would dedicate a whole year of training to just training at long muscle lengths. You wouldn't take that risk and do partials at long muscle lengths. And sure, some people in the past have made the hypothesis that, yeah, the stretch is an important part of training. But if it wasn't for science to actually go ahead and test that and explore potential mechanisms and so on and so forth, the bodybuilder in 10 years who will be doing quite a bit of their work just in the lengthened range of motion versus a full range of motion, that bodybuilder will be basing their practices off science. Obviously, that practice will be molded and morphed from other things like preference and just generally their experience, goals, and so on and so forth. But it's science that is providing the base for us to act upon.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And I didn't actually intend our discussion to be shade, but I know what you're referring to, because there was this kind of back and forth between yourself and Jordan Peters, which, I mean, people in the UK will very much be aware of who he is. And you were kind of like calling him out for kind of calling you out, and it was like a bit of a tit for tat, and you're just kind of expanding upon your points here. And I think, as I think I even said on that post, if you guys were to sit down together and chat about it, I think you'd have way more that you'd agree upon. Maybe there's slight things that you'd be like, don't agree, and see kind of eye to eye here, but generally you'd also agree for the reasons you just mentioned here, I think.
Yeah, so just to put it out there and on the record, this was a case of him, I don't know, having a bad day, or just if he genuinely believes that science is absolutely useless and has nothing to offer to hypertrophy training, then I still stand by the fact that that's a dumb take. I do feel that this was probably him just being somewhat hyperbolic and not really expecting anybody to care. And obviously my response, I do acknowledge that it may have not been the best course, the best way to create productive discussion. Because, yeah, it was like myself and Milo made a couple of memes. Obviously, we included all the disclaimers in the description of our post, but it was a personal attack in a way, right? Like it was me. It was a case of, okay, you're chatting shit, and now you're going to get me talking back to you, and here's my comeback, sort of like a rap battle. But yeah, I'm acknowledging that. However, I do think that, like, obviously, look, bro, it's not the end of the world. This was a chat about science and hypertrophy, and I do believe that if we were to chat with JP, like my main point is, bro, like what his training is more or less science based in the sense that he's doing enough-ish volume, he's adding weight, he's training very close to failure, and he's doing a bunch of exercises for all muscle groups. Like that's what science essentially preaches for muscle growth. So that's where I get a bit like I think people have this idea that scientists are there preaching something completely unorthodox or super like data-based or suboptimal. And it's like, if we were to look at the latest scientific evidence, you have to train with enough volume. That is not 10 to 20 sets for everyone, right? And that's not what science says. You have to train very hard and potentially perform a variety of movements, not 50 movements per muscle group, but you'll do a leg curl and a hip hinge exercise, and you'll have to go close to failure and train pretty effing hard. Like that's what science is preaching. Nobody is saying the opposite. So I'm like, I don't get the hate towards science, because if science was like, you know what, guys, to become an advanced bodybuilder and be like a freak of nature, you can get away with just 2 sets per muscle group per week that are very far from failure. Like if science was preaching that, I'd be like, okay, yeah, I get why they're hating, but I don't know. But yeah, anyways, that's just to clear the air.
Yeah, for sure. I see where you're coming from, and to be fair, I'm sympathetic. Not to say that I think it's fine the way that like Jordan put out his message there, but I'm sympathetic to the idea of how it could be annoying, because there's times in which I get annoyed just in day-to-day life, but particularly surrounding like health and fitness, where people, I don't know, they're in their dogmatic camp, they're really pushing an agenda, and you're just like, you just want to kind of react to it in a way that maybe isn't how you normally would want to communicate. It's not a very nuanced thought. You just kind of react. And I'm sure I've done that in the past. And in terms of what I think maybe some people like himself and other people that like to discount science, I think they're not discounting necessarily science. They're more so discounting this idea that there's like this perfect prescription, which you talked about at the start, where it's like some people use science to think like this is the way. I've had people send me like other natural bodybuilders who train in quite a different way that I do, because like it works for them, of course. And they're like, how are they seeing results like this? It's against the science. And I'm like, they're training to failure with less volume than me. I leave like reps in reserve and train with more volume. Like, we don't have the perfect prescription here. It's not like I have found the way. And I think that's what people try and use science. They want the answer. And it's like, science doesn't give you the answer. It just gives you, like we're finding out with long muscle lengths, like it's like, oh, it's edging us towards, oh, okay, we're onto something here. But it's not like the answer to things, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, for sure. And at the same time, the reason I got annoyed and then I clapped back, obviously some context here, like I made that meme, I think at around 6 a.m. Greek time. So I was in Greece. I came back from a walk actually at 5:30 a.m. and sat until 7 a.m. So I was in a bit of a mood as well. But what annoyed me was the fact that we are the first to clap back at PubMed warriors and people that are all about, like, at the end of the day, it does come down to training hard consistently. Like, okay, obviously don't be the guy who is training like Branch Warren full on and just like doing front raises with horrible form or whatever. And it doesn't come down to discounting science, but it does all come down to, hey, training hard consistently over time. But you can also do that in a smart way. So saying that all hypertrophy researchers are small and do research on people that are small is like, we're at a day and age where JP or anybody else is aware that there are people out there, you know, like Eric Helms, like ourselves and others who are in the science, but they're also lifting, competing, coaching other people at high levels, either in strength or physique sports. And it was just, I took it a bit personally because I was like, look, bro, we do the science that we do mostly because we love science. Obviously, it does benefit us indirectly in other areas as well. But yeah, I felt like it was an unjustified and uncalled for attack where it didn't really give it. Like, guy could have said, hey, science for me as an advanced, enhanced bodybuilder who works with like a very select a group of people that are not represented by the science whatsoever. I don't pay attention to new publications that much. I use my experience more, and that's totally fine, right? That's completely justifiable. But calling all science useless as far as hypertrophy training goes puts you in a weird corner and completely invalidates any argument that you can make. You know?
Yeah, no, I totally see that. It was personal for sure, which is why I can understand your response back, because it's like tit for tat type of thing. Which
and that was it though.
Yeah, for sure. And sometimes it's unfortunate because I don't think, like with Menno's post as an example, I think it's great because it draws people to it. But if they just see the title, they don't read it, they don't see the terms and conditions. Now you've got some PubMed warrior saying, look, there was this study, Menno posted it, deloads are completely useless, and that's what their take home is. And like, you get into trouble there too. So it's just hard though, because who would have seen your post if you didn't word it the way you worded it? Would we be having this discussion right? Well, I would hope we'd still have this discussion here, but it wouldn't be in the same way. You wouldn't have had as many eyes. You wouldn't have made people think about it as much. So it's just social media and like communication that's challenging. I think there's not an answer here, I don't think.
Yeah, and like there was the argument made by Coach Kasim on that the way this was presented potentially just allowed the people that would agree with me anyways to agree with me, and the people that could have their minds changed, the fact that it was an attack pushed them to disagree further or not engage in a discussion. I do think the truth is somewhere in the middle, but to touch on what you said about like clickbait titles and stuff, unfortunately, I don't think a lot of people read or care about the disclaimers. And that's why we have this caricature of science and this idea that scientists are these, extremely wise and all knowledgeable, like that they know everything, right? So it's because people want a simple answer, and we can derive simple practical takeaways from a complex study or even like the literature on long muscle lengths. Yeah, sure, mechanisms are not fully clear yet, and like you can have Milo here press play and speak for an hour and a half without pausing about the research, but at the end of the day he can give you a sentence or two on, hey, this is how you take this and you apply to your training. But yeah, I think clickbaity titles need to be somewhat cautiously crafted, because yeah, what you said, I think is why science gets a bad rep, because people are like, here we go again, study finds that training doesn't build muscle, and like it may be a study that looked at, I don't know, training after 20 years of training, the like longitudinal growth modeling, and that, hey, like we did a study like that where people gained most of their strength in 2 years and then plateaued in the next 5 to 7 years. But the conclusion there is not training after 2 years doesn't build muscle, although you could make a clickbaity title to represent that study, but then people are not going to read the study, of course. They're not going to read the description. And then Dr. Pak or Dr. Steve, they're the scientists and the elitists that like will tell us things we already knew, or will try and tell us that what we know is not true, even though we know it's true.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because as another topic I wanted to move on to is the idea, actually, before I go on to the next topic, I just wanted to say this point, which is kind of about our initial one in terms of maybe discounting science. Is I feel like I've always had this perspective, but certainly my perspective now is how kind of the bros, to call them that, like the guys that were doing bodybuilding before, like we were looking into it via the research, they kind of led the research because it was like, oh, what are they doing that's right? What are they doing that could be refined? Then the research comes out, it confirms whether or not they're doing some things right, or maybe they could improve some things. It kind of refines that process. So I always I like to view them as synergistic. It's like, okay, so what are people doing in real life? Let's test it. Okay, maybe refine it, which is kind of what the long muscle length stuff is doing. Like bros were rowing with loads of momentum because in the short position, it's really tough on that movement. They were doing dumbbell lateral raises, swinging them up there because again, it's really hard in the short position, and maybe they're doing something kind of clever almost because they're trying to match the resistance profile to the strength profile of that muscle, and they're seeing good results that way. Research shows, there's something to long muscle lengths. Maybe length and partials are the kind of refined way to get to that stimulus without all the excessive fatigue of the momentum and the lack of standardization or what have you. So I kind of view it like that. But the next topic I wanted to talk about is something you kind of alluded to there. And I have found myself having to be careful here as well, because I am, as much as I run this podcast, I talk to incredibly smart people like yourself who do the research, and I read papers, and I go on to the Mass Research Review and I kind of read through those. I am not like perfect at being able to understand all the methods and whether or not the different statistical models that are used and to interpret it perfectly. So I rely upon science communicators like yourself and the Mass Research Review and people like this to like help inform maybe some of my content. But then even guys at like your level, researchers, can interpret studies differently, which then makes it challenging. So if you are just a layperson using kind of science to like as a marketing tool, and you're like you said, you just reported that study, they could have said, there's no gains after the first 2 years of lifting. Like, I don't know if you have thoughts on that, or kind of how people who are maybe coaches who are trying to be evidence-based can be careful about their science communication and make sure they're not leading people down the wrong path in that regard.
Yeah. Can I touch on the bros were right first, just very briefly? Yeah. So I do think that the bros, were right on a bunch of things, but it's important to look at what justification was used by the bros for X or Y thing being right or good for muscle growth. So a lot of people, like for lengthened partials, specifically, like you use rows as an example. I think a lot of bros were just rowing heavy or doing like heavy movements with a limited range of motion just because heavy weight or compound exercises grow more muscle, or you gotta like attack the weight or train with intensity and progressive overload. So yes, sure, some things that the bros did in practice without fully knowing why they were doing them, have been proven to be right, but the reason why they were right may have not been the reason they used to justify doing those things. So it's important to throw that disclaimer out instead of just saying, they knew that. Yep, they were right. It's like they were making a bet and they were doing something, and that's something. Okay, cool. You're training. It's likely that at some points you may YOLO it and go a bit heavy and just do some sloppy reps. But let's not make it as if they were there and they had like a very detailed hypothesis and were like, look, long muscle lengths. We don't have direct evidence on this, but here's a 5-page justification for why I'm doing this. I think it was mostly like, oh yeah, heavyweight, let's go, brother. Let's feel it. Let's like the classic heavy rows for a thick back, which, okay, nice. Cool. Why? Compound movements. Here are some words. And that was that. Now,
I was just going to say, like, an easy example here is like fasted cardio. Like in their head, like, I haven't eaten, so I'm going to just burn fat. But it's like energy balance at the end of the day is what matters most. It's like science actually really helped, I think, people with that to understand it. I'm sure there's still bros who really like hold on to the fact fasted cardio is doing something special. And it might have other like mechanisms to why it's working. Like it delays the amount of time, their eating window's smaller, so they adhere to the diet easier, whatever. But yeah, I think you made a really good point, because this is why science is useful, because it gives us actual kind of, again, refines the method a little bit and gives us kind of ways to move.
Yeah, and in many other cases, they weren't necessarily right. Low carb diets or squats for upper body growth or like growth hormone and so on and so forth. But like for people coming up in the field or who are active in the field and are coaches and just generally fitness professionals or exercise professionals, I think investing in things like Mass, or I'll plug our research review here as well, Reps Research Review, which is done by myself and Lane Norton on Lane's platform. But following evidence-based, science communicators that have some credentials, have experience with actually being active researchers, I think that's important as well, is your best bet at making sure you are getting those disclaimers and you are hearing about the nuance, and then obviously taking all that, processing it, and coming out with an easy to follow, a practical recommendation or whatever for your clients or for your audience. At the same time, sure, I do get that the game requires some form of clickbaitiness, or you need to engage people for people to care. But I think that can be done somewhat cautiously, right? So like we released, and obviously we're not the example for clickbait or social media. We're by no means social media experts, but like we released a podcast episode with Milo on essentially the caricature of bodybuilding being just for show and being just for people to look good, and you're not functional, or you can't perform if you do bodybuilding, whereas if you do strength training, you're all of a sudden this super functional, resilient machine. And the title of the video or the podcast is strength training healthier than bodybuilding? Like, sure, it's clickbaity enough for people to be like, oh, okay, let's see what's happening there, but it's not. Science study shows that bodybuilding is as healthy as strength training, because then people will take that and run with the idea that, oh, okay, so you're telling me enhanced bodybuilder X, who is 300 pounds on stage, is healthier than myself, who I'm myself, the strength trainee, where whatever. You get what I mean. I lost it a bit there. I choked, as we say. But following science communicators that do have credentials and are active researchers and will go through the actual scientific process and are actively going through the scientific process, including writing manuscripts and so on and so forth, I think is your best bet, because at the end of the day, without wanting to discount science or our work, like building muscle and getting stronger is not rocket science, right? Like, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but it's like people can sound scientific without being scientific. So like you can't, if you have like a degree and you have some knowledge of the literature, you can still make claims and be speculative enough for it to make sense. And chances are you're not going to say anything way too extreme. But for people listening to that version of science, maybe more maybe clouding their judgment or their ability to come up with practical takeaways a bit more than listening to somebody like Eric Helms or reading Mass or Reps. So yeah, the disclaimers are important, and it's important to also follow people that are up to date with the literature and will bother to talk about those disclaimers and the details of those studies and tell you, yeah, this study showed this, but then this study showed that, and it may be that if we look at this and we can explain this way. So it's important to engage in that behind the scenes as a science communicator. Did I answer your question, or was this just like an extreme
tangent?
So.
No, I think so. I think one of the things I was going to touch on there was the title of things. I've personally found doing it this way as well, and we've kind of stumbled upon the same way of doing it, is almost having a question. So I've had infographics that, like, the first one is, are deloads a waste of time? ? Yep. It's not deloads are a waste of time, and like people can take that away. If there's a question mark there, no one's got an answer. They have to then go and read to try and identify kind of what's going on. So I think doing it that way is a nice way to kind of get people intrigued without like obvious clickbaiting or anything like that. So I think that's useful. And then even something I found useful thinking about recently is, I don't know why it feels like recently there's been lots of research coming out, and like I'm wanting to stay on top of it. And I've been talking to a lot of people who have been conducting the research. Like I had Max Coleman on about his deload study, which came out. And I recently had Daniel Plotkin on talking about kind of the hip thrust versus the squat. And as a practitioner sometimes, and someone who's evidence-based, it can be stressful almost trying to keep up with things and being like, oh, do I have to modify because I've learned this here and that's completely changed the game? And what I remind myself of is like one study coming out is just building upon the evidence that was already there, of which you've already taken your kind of practices from, including your own experience. So one study is unlikely to completely change your philosophies. So you don't have to stress about that. And in addition to that, different researchers have different takes on them. Even the back and forth on that study between like Brett and Milo, like Milo's got more insights into like the muscle length style of training and what studies you'd need to conduct to give answers to that. Whereas Brett's kind of had this maybe initial interpretation. So it's great even seeing scientists have that back and forth. And if you were to just jump on it, you just take one person's take, and you might have taken away the wrong conclusion once there's more evidence kind of building towards that, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a reality check you get as an evidence-based practitioner at some point, and you're like, oh, okay. When you look behind the curtain, it's like there's so many questions. It's like the Dunning-Kruger Valley of Despair, where you're like, oh, we don't know anything. But what happens is after the Valley of Despair, you reach a point where you're like, look, as an evidence-based practitioner in the past 5 years, if you were relying on the core principles of like program design and like for the core principles for muscle growth and strength, you may have to change your stance slightly on incorporating more partials at long muscle length work. What else? I'm trying to think. Like, yeah, sure, you'll tweak a few things here and there. You may be like, you know what? Let's now try some lower RPE work for our strength sets, because this new meta came out. But the idea that you're going to be, if again you're not doing anything extreme, and you're basing your work and what you preach on like core principles of training, which is, you know, hard training, frequency, volume, and so on and so forth, it is unlikely that you'll be changing your approach drastically like every month or even every year. It's more of a case like this new deload study came out. This new deload study essentially showed that a week in a 8-week training block, taking a week off in people that didn't really need to deload didn't affect their hypertrophy negatively, affected their strength somewhat. But then if you look at the literature overall, we have other training succession studies that show that, you know, taking 2.5 or 3.5 or 5 days off doesn't really affect strength that much. We know that a week off won't affect your hypertrophy gains that much. And what you can take from that study is that, hey, deloads, do reactive deloads whenever you need a deload. If you need to take a week of training here and there, don't worry that much about it. Sure, if you're like a strength athlete and for some reason you're doing like a strength test after that week, maybe you should include some training. And that's that. Like, it doesn't, you're not going to go, oh, well, I guess that's that for deloads. That one study came out, so we're going to completely change our practice, and every client I've ever prescribed a deload for is now going to be suing me and telling me, why did I take those weeks off, man? They impaired my strength gains. So it's important to also realize that, hey, it's unlikely that things are going to change so drastically from like in a short period of time that you have to actually change your practices. Chances are you may have to make some tweaks, keep an open mind, and that's that.
Yeah, I find sometimes with those sort of research papers that come out, they might already confirm something that you're doing, or they edge you in a direction that you're already potentially going in. So with like that deload study, I already was like, I have pre-planned deloads, but auto-regulate them based off how a client is doing. So I already asked them the week before they're due it, like, how are you feeling? Can we still have a productive week of training? Kind of give me some fatigue markers. And it just doubled me down on that. Whereas like, if someone doesn't report into me how they're doing there, I'm not like, we're not just deloading next week. I need you to have earned kind of your deload in that sense, because unless there's a reason they need to take it. But also it's nice to have that, like you mentioned, and I don't think many people took this away from it, but people took 1 week off within that period and saw just as good gains. So it kind of gives you, again, like almost confidence that, like, if you're one of your clients, it's like, oh, I got a holiday mid-meso. This is totally stressful, right? I'm going to lose all my gains. It's like, no, it's actually probably going to not impact anything at all. Enjoy your holiday.
You should just instead of like, you should cut me out of this podcast episode, have just the last 20 seconds of you speaking and name it "Bodybuilder Destroys Science."
No one would believe it from me. I'm like way too entrenched into science.
Yeah, but yeah, I definitely agree for sure.
And that kind of leads me on to my next question I had for you in terms of like, over the last few years, is there anything that has like changed in your prescriptions? anything based off like your own experimentation or research or your own kind of clients' experiences, or if there's any of your practices that you feel like maybe doesn't quite align with some of the kind of sciences out there, or does it? Yeah, I guess that's the question.
The long muscle length stuff, for sure. For my own personal training, I've been doing, like, for some muscle groups, almost exclusively partials at long muscle lengths. For things like side delts and biceps, and even triceps. I like how I'm listing them now. I have started incorporating lower RPE training for some clients for their strength work, because I do work with quite a few powerlifters. But overall, I'd say the minimum dose stuff that we did as well has been great, especially for people that are lacking motivation. Like, I have clients who will go through the odd, stressful period with work, and having the minimum dose research to rely on has been great. But like, even on the minimum dose stuff that we did, the fact that it got a lot of anecdotal support is what has helped me incorporate it even more. So, like, people reaching out and saying, you know what, I played around with this and it worked great, and I did this and I did that. That has allowed me to have this sense of a calmness, I guess, and knowing that, no matter what, as long as we can get some hard sets during in a week, as long as you're not working with like a competitive bodybuilder whose life depends on gaining as much muscle as possible, like, we're going to be fine. Even for strength athletes, I mean, even for a bodybuilder, they would be fine to train like that for a week or two, or even more, I'd argue. But those are, I guess, the main things. Another thing could be like reading upon some of the literature on health, and more specifically waist circumference measurements, as well as the importance of physical activity, which we obviously knew, but I've been somewhat more vocal about the fact that, hey, resistance train for at least an hour a week at a relatively high intensity of effort, and make sure you're getting either enough moderate physical activity by the form of walking or other, low to moderate intensity modalities of cardio, or some vigorous intensity physical activity. But those are not really things that science that changed. It's not that before I wouldn't recommend it, but looking at all the studies and looking at the scientific data has allowed me to become a bit more vocal about those things. So again, to come back to my previous point, the past few years, having worked with hundreds of people, sure, some clients now may be getting the odd set or sets at long muscle partials at long muscle lengths. They may be hearing more about okay, let's emphasize the stretch, and we can skip the lockout if you'd like. Other than that, minimum dose here and there, but like, nothing huge has changed besides me.
That makes a lot of sense. It's the same with me. That probably the biggest change, which was more of a, I guess, movement in that direction, because like you said, we already had ideas about like stretch mediated hypertrophy, and like long muscle lengths were a good idea, full range of motion, kind of get a big stretch, get deep, what have you. So it kind of just partials, I wasn't ever doing those, whereas now that's like, I would say by far the biggest change. But in reality, like, it's not like a huge change. Even maybe I was kind of, again, using momentum on those pulling movements anyway to try and like get around that at the time. I was convinced, I was trying to find reasons why using momentum was like something I should be doing in those scenarios. So it was nice for me to see this research come out, and so I can just refine that practice further, and same with my clients, and use that. Actually, calves is one area I've been like abusing length and partials, and like, I hope my calves are growing. They feel like they are. It's just a matter of time. So I think that's refreshing. And even actually talking about your minimum dose stuff, that's something specificity, like, people want to grow muscle. My clients are generally along that way, but some of them are like, they want to do some power building. And so with your literature that came out, I was like, actually, we don't need that much work. We can actually incorporate that into our routine and it not take away too much from the other goal that you had. So that's been quite cool. And then with the recent meta-regression, the main thing that made me kind of think about is maybe just stepping a step closer in terms of relative intensity. So if I was more towards like a 3 or 4, 2 to 3, like at the start of a meso, I've just like stepped it up versus like hanging out so my proximities to failure on average were a bit closer to failure than they used to be. But like you said, it's like, it's not really a big change. So it's nice that we can rely upon the like stay home big rocks, the principles that we've known for a long period of time, And we haven't even touched on nutrition, which ultimately I don't think has really changed in years.
No, maybe some confirmation on, like, there's been more studies on like low carb versus high carb diets, intermittent fasting. That's another way where science was like, if we were to just go based on like mechanistic data and hypotheses and like you had Martin Berkhan, who was a huge like intermittent fasting proponent. And like, if you were to just look at like people's testimonials and ideas about intermittent fasting, it was this like game changer for like your physique and your health and longevity. And like science comes in and says, it's fine, it's great. And in some cases it may have some health benefits to offer that are somewhat greater than just plain calorie restriction. Terms and conditions apply, right? Being cautious, don't quote me. But science came in and said, hey guys, it's not magical. So that's another example of where science helped. But with a new meta by Zach, shout out Zach Robinson, shout out Josh Pelland, shout out Data Driven Strength, shout out my mother, shout out my father. I don't know why people were losing their shit. Like, okay, bro, like I'm training to failure. So even though JP doesn't think I train hard, JK, shout out JP. I've bought quite a few of his products. I do have 2 cream of rice by JP in my kitchen. So I have earned my right to make the meme. So I bought my right, and I have his EAAs as well. So thank you.
Cream of rice and EAAs. You are total bro. Certified.
Yeah, because with the EAAs, even though I'm an evidence-based practitioner, I was like, you know what? I want to placebo it and tell myself it makes a difference, even though I know it doesn't. But joking aside and ADHD aside, what I wanted to say is that like I've been training to failure, like to legit failure, especially after the long muscle length stuff came out, for a great deal of time, because my training is primarily hypertrophy focused. So I'll go to the point where I am physically trying to move the rope, and I cannot move it, not even for a bit. And it's like the new meta came out, and I'm like, okay, bro, if you were a serious trainee about hypertrophy, were you really leaving like 4 reps in reserve on many sets? And like, sure, you didn't, like, even that meta is not saying take the set to the point where you have your friend like saving your life under the leg press, but it's like, okay, you got to go very close or to failure. And I mean, you as a bodybuilder, right? I assume that's what you were doing before to a certain extent, right?
Yeah. My average RARs were like around a 2. So like, I don't think that meta like really changed the picture like for that. And yeah, involuntary failure is serious. Yeah, it was very good. And yeah, I mean, even terms and conditions apply to that. I recently quoted Eric Helms because he was on the Iron Culture podcast, and like the majority of the research papers in that, the vast majority, were looking at trainees who are doing like pretty low volumes for bodybuilders, like around 10 sets or less, and training 3 days a week or less. So it's like when you have that in your mind and then you think about training to failure or not, you're like, of course, like you would kind of expect training to failure to be more beneficial in that scenario because you haven't got the volume on the other side of the equation. And then it gets back into that question of, hey, what's the perfect prescription here? And it's like, we don't have that answer just yet.
So you said 10 sets were low volume?
10 sets per muscle per week.
I'm getting a phone call from Mike Mentor from the afterlife. Hello. Yeah, he and how much did Brad pay you to make those statements? Shout out to Brad Schoenfeld. And I always find funny when people are like, yeah, the big volume. And I'm like, guys, the data showed what the data showed. Like, if the data showed lower volume, that's what it showed. It's not, nobody's getting paid by a higher entity controlling training volume. Or are they? Is my life being threatened right now under the desk and I'm winking? Morse code, save me.
Do you not see the progress you would like? Are you sick of writing your own programs? Or perhaps you need some accountability in order to stick with a plan? Then it's time to start working with us. We at Revive Stronger offer a truly personalized coaching service. You'll get more than just an email with some macros or random cookie cutter program. With Revive Stronger, you will be the center of our attention. You will receive your own fully individualized training protocol alongside a customized nutritional strategy. We created the coaching around your needs, wants, personal preferences, and your own unique lifestyle. Every single week, we delve into your program in order to make appropriate adjustments so that we we get the most out of your time and the best possible outcome. We help both female and male athletes to seriously change their body composition by adding more muscle mass and decreasing fat tissue. No matter if you're a competitive bodybuilder or just want to look better, if you need help with your progress and taking your physique to the next level, our coaching is for you. It's time to make a change. Sign up today and let's revive stronger.
Pack, out of interest, why is your training all to momentary muscular failure?
I was gonna make a joke, but F it. Because I like, even for myself as an experienced trainee, my training is relatively, and I think that will allow us to make a nice transition to another question that I am guessing now magically, and I haven't read the questions before. That my training is somewhat freestyle in the sense that I do the same movements, but I don't have like a very structured weekly plan. I travel a lot and I enjoy training like that more. But I'll do sets on a lat pull down. I'll do deficit barbell rows. I'll do a certain set of exercises, and it's just a way for me to ensure that I am pushing myself and standardizing my intensity of effort to a way where I can control and compare each week in this sort of framework where things are somewhat up in the air as far as overall structure goes. So I know that if I'm taking a set to momentary failure to the point where I'm attempting another rep and I can't even move it for partials or long muscle lengths, I know that if I'm moving up in weight and on that exercise over time, that I'm making progress. Otherwise, if I was leaving 2 to 3 reps in reserve, aside from the fact that because of the traveling and difference in equipment and so on and so forth, my ability to clearly detect between 4 and 3 or 2 RIR may be affected sometimes. I think it wouldn't be as nice, but it's also enjoyable for me. I love training with an intensity of effort, and I also I don't perform that much training volume, so I am between 8 and 15 sets per muscle group per week. Quads except quads.
Quads lower.
Quads, bro. Like, I was an avid squatter for many years, to the point where I had training weeks where I did just squats, nothing else. Like, I had a couple of weeks in my life where I went and just did squats 4 days a week. But
for the hormones.
Yeah, for the hormones, indeed. No, now it's like maintaining them. I still do a lot of deadlifting, but I don't engage in insanely high volume quad training. If anything, it's like minimum maintenance dose ish.
Cool.
2023.
Yeah, I like your explanation there. It's kind of contrasting to my way of training generally, where I do start out like a mesocycle with more in the tank, and then I kind of switch off to some extent and just look to like gain a repetition or a bit of load each week. But that wouldn't work in a scenario where your gym is changing fairly regularly. It's like, I know I'm at this gym for the next year, so I can progress in this manner and have that level of standardization. Whereas, like you said, if you're moving consistently like all over the shop, like it does get challenging when you're coming to a new movement to kind of hit the required RER, I think, at least in my experience as well, where like I remember going to Das Gym and I was trying out, like everything was new there, and I was like, man, I'm trying to hit a 2 RER, but can I this pendulum is so different to the pendulum I'm used to, like the resistance profile. Like, I feel like I've grinded out a few reps here, but like, where am I precisely? So is that like, just, again, that's something the bros got right, is when you train to failure, you've trained hard enough, you've guaranteed it.
And just the only exercise I don't train to failure is deadlifts, because I use that as like I'm training deadlifts for deadlifts to get the deadlift stronger. But it's interesting, and I wanted to ask like a very brief question, because you mentioned RAR. Is like, although the research, and that includes research we've done and we've published, shows that people are relatively accurate at predicting repetitions in reserve, as a coach, from my experience, and even working out with other people, and even G-checking myself sometimes, I've found that maybe in an acute setting, if I tell you, hey Steve, okay, we're doing leg extensions to failure now, and I want you to predict, or if I tell you let's go all out, I think you'll be really good at knowing when you're close to failure. But I mean, I've I have clients who are experienced trainees and have been in the gym for time, and like I will look at some of their sets or even people that I've trained with, and like you'll see them and they're struggling and they're like, oh, especially on things like RDLs or like leg extensions where it just gets very like painful after a certain point, and then but you know that they have like 5 reps in reserve when they've said they have 2. Like, is that your experience as well, or am I just like an exception?
No, I've definitely had that. Tends to be their initial like programming with me where we're just learning it. Once you have logbook data and you add that layer on top, like I said, like training in the same gym, and you know, like in that final week, you've taken it to momentary muscular failure on some sets, or clearly in 0 RAR based off like rep speed and watching it. Again, clearly 0 RAR, that's like up to like opinion a little bit, but I've watched them and I'm pretty convinced. Then once you have that, and that kind of gives you a baseline of numbers to kind of have reserves back, like you take 3 reps off their 0 RAR as an example, then it just becomes almost standardized, and then they can progress over time. But there is that initial learning curve sometimes for people who are even like who are relatively well trained. They're almost like so conservative because they're trying to stay away from it and they're worried they're going to get too close. But once that learning curve is out the way, it tends to kind of, they tend to be pretty good. So I was surprised by the research. And in fact, I know Jake Remmert, I recently had him on the podcast and we spoke through his paper, and they just released another one where, again...
Another one.
Yeah, another one, exactly, where people were really good at it. So, it's interesting. But yeah, my experience is similar.
Right? And that's where being truly evidence-based come in play. Like, I approach people with the assumption that they will be really good once we talk about it a bit and calibrate it, that they will be solid and I can rely upon them to estimate reps in reserve. But at the same time, I don't take everything at face value the first week or 2 that we work together, where they say, yep, RPE 8. And then I watch the set and I'm like, I think you had like 10 reps left there. So that's another good example of where, you know, science or being scientific does not mean, taking scientific data and just like blindly trusting it, or not applying your experience, or not using your experience or preference or whatever.
And that's something I took from, I think it was Dr. Mike, where it was like match or beat performance. It's just like, okay, if we start this baseline of we're trying to train hard, but not all out, you try and match or beat that every week until you can't. And then, you know, if you went for like 20 weeks, which has never happened in my experience, but if you did, then man, there's some adaptations going on for sure, but you probably were training a bit too easy for a period of time, especially as a kind of pretty advanced lifter. Whereas if you've gone, quite often I get to that final week before deloading and I'm like, yeah, I've been doing that right the whole time. That's quite a nice like confirmation of, I failed where I expected to, or maybe I get an extra rep on something sometimes. That sort of thing can happen too. But yeah, I mean, it would actually make life easier if we had enough data to just suggest training to failure was absolutely the way to go, because then there would be no
for sure
ifing or butting or anything. But I think there's good reason that hasn't come out. And I'm interested to see more research come out. I know I've actually already interviewed Martin Refalo. It will come out. He hasn't published any of his research. I am kind of I've had privy to it a little bit earlier, but he did a very well run study. I won't kind of allude to the results, but
I will allude to the results.
More studies like that will be good. Or do you already know? I don't know. You might do.
Was it a bench press study?
Bench press and single leg press.
Okay, maybe I'm confusing it. There was a study.
I think they did bench as well, but it was single leg press is what I'm remembering.
Anyways, the results out soon. Revive Stronger. Sign up. Coaching. Link in bio.
So yes, in terms of the next question, so I'm just going to read this verbatim because this is how I sent it to you as well. So as an analytic trainer, I love standardization. For example, a clear start and end point to repetitions, or even training within a certain week. So rather than like, I like a Gregorian calendar sticking to like 6 days on, 1 day off, almost to my detriment at times, and not like just allowing it to spread over more time or what have you. So with this standardization element has been like, I think people have talked about it quite a lot and how it's probably important, because like you're trying to, like even you mentioned how you knowing if something's working if you don't have like something standardized for it. But where do you think some people sometimes can go a bit wrong with this? I know the podcast with Mike, this came into discussion a little bit around logbooking and some standardization elements. I'd love to hear your kind of thoughts behind that.
Yeah. So with Mike, we briefly alluded to, so I made the comment that, hey, we don't have any sort of scientific any direct evidence showing that tracking meticulously every variable over time is going to lead to more gains than not. Obviously, terms and conditions apply. That's talking about extremes, right? And trying to draw inferences by looking at logbook data over time and trying to understand why your performance changed from one week to the other, because there's so many variables that come in play. Or just, my point was that stimulus overall remains king. And for some people, now, if you are a competitive physique athlete or even a strength athlete, detailed logbooking probably makes sense, because you are dedicating a lot of time to your sport. You're competing at a high level, and if you have any chance at controlling any sort of variable or eking out a bit more insight from some variables, it makes sense that you know how your training is going, even if that's for a peace of mind, sort of, even if it's just for your own peace of mind and for you to know that you, as Steve, this year you did everything that you could and you've beat all your PRs and you have absolutely put all the effort that was humanly possible from your end into your bodybuilding prep. So in those contexts, I get that standardizing and tracking things meticulously makes sense, but that's just for a very select group of people that are not your average individual. Now, for standardization, I do think that the word and the implication of its importance sometimes may create this sort of false idea that one, you're running the risk of not standardizing things and unless you're being very meticulous, which I think is wrong. Like, if you're training in a gym and you're performing a bunch of exercises consistently, I find it very difficult to, unless you're an extreme person, I find it very difficult that you will perform them with such huge differences in training technique over time, where you won't be able to understand whether you're making progress or not. Like, if you're being stupid about your training and you're doing a full ROM lat pull down for weeks 1 to 4, and then all of a sudden you're doing like partials at long muscle lengths for the rest of your training cycle, then yeah. But even there, I would argue that as long as you're getting very close or too close to momentary failure and improving that performance over time, you will still make gains, although you may not really know if you're making as good progress or not. So one point is that standardization appears like it's this complex thing that needs to be achieved through very meticulous planning, when in reality it's like, okay, have a standard range of motion that you perform, and a similar cadence in the end. Like, you've standardized, and it's not that difficult to do, right? Because that was a point made by partials along muscle. It's like, bro, like, if you're unable to stop midway and like maybe look at the equipment or like have a mental note of where you're stopping, like even if you slightly move your hand up or down a bit more, a bit less, that's not going to cause you to gain less muscle. Same with sets that you're taking to failure, where the last rep you may swing, like you're doing a barbell row, you may use a bit more body English. Like, is anybody going to tell you, you know what, that last rep didn't look exactly the same as your last rep last week? You're not really standardizing, you're missing out on gains. So that's point number one. And point number two, I do think that for many people, focusing on, again, getting in enough volume, whatever that means, that may be 5 sets for some people, that may be 25 sets for other people, getting in enough volume spread out in the week, high intensity of effort, and biasing long muscle lengths. Those 3 things are more important than following an exact structure or slightly doing less or more from week to week or from month to month. So I think over the long term, if you are rowing 80 kilos and then in 5 for sets of 6 to 8 reps, and in 2 years from now you're rowing 100 kilos for 6 to 8 reps for similar sets, even if in those years you've done 3 sets on one week, 4 on the other, 5 on the other week, 3, 2, and like it's varying, but you're consistently increasing your performance while obviously making sure you're eating enough, recovering, and so on and so forth. I don't think that a person who would have an extremely rigid structure would make more muscle gains than you, assuming that you're taking all the basic boxes: volume, intensity, and exercise selection. So, and that's why my training personally has been freestyle, but it's not freestyle. People will often assume that if you're not following a very rigidly structured program, you're there rolling a pair of dice and doing random exercises. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that, you've decided, okay, day 1 is upper push, day 2 is lower, day 4 is push pull, and so on and so forth. But there may be weeks where you'll do a bit less volume here, a bit more volume there. You may do an extra set, an extra rep here, an extra rep there. You may slightly change the repetition range. So instead of 8 to 10, you may go 10 to 12. But over time, you're looking at adding weight, at being in training with a high intensity of effort, and at beating your previous performance. So I think those things matter more than this like rigid standardization that is sometimes presented as an absolute non-negotiable variable if you want to optimize hypertrophy.
Yeah, I think it's the way I can contrast it to that at least works in my eyes for people that maybe aren't like completely getting it is like the comparison to nutrition, where like if you are meeting macros but you're changing your foods, like some packages might be out slightly, or maybe you eat out and you guesstimate it or whatever. Maybe one day you have a bit more sodium, your body weight's slightly higher, but you're weighing yourself yeah, I mean, people will argue in an ideal world, you have to follow a strict meal plan and have everything in a vacuum so you can possibly see if you're losing or gaining weight at the perfect rate. But like real world, it's not realistic particularly, and it's also not required. There's a certain level of standardization, and I think the further you get from that, like you said, the more kind of concerns you might have for whether or not you're making progress. So the person that's hugely dedicated wants to make every like bit of progress they can. They want to get closer to that like standardization we're looking for. But I think there's almost that extreme where you can go past where you're so standardized where you can start losing like progress, where it's like perfect form or something, or like if I'm off by just a little bit here or there, you start stressing about it more, or like just the stress of hitting macros perfectly to the gram and following your meal plan, and then, oh no, today, my like girlfriend's brought home something and she wants to cook for us, and oh no, I have to stick to my meal plan, and that's a huge stress, and you break up and you cry, and now you don't eat anything for the rest of the day and you don't hit your macros. I don't know, you know what I mean? Like where you can take these things so far to the extreme, almost like that flexible dieting kind of dimmer switch, where it's like you're not off or on, you're like on to certain degrees depending on your goals and where you are. Kind of with training, like there's a certain level of seriousness and standardization you have to have, but if you go too far that extreme, you can actually leave, or you can do unnecessary things that could lead you to worse results.
Yeah, and to your point, and that's a point I didn't make when we were chatting with Dr. Mike, is that for some people it may promote, or it may lead to a neurotic type of behavior. Especially for those who are very regimented in other areas of their life, like their work life or their academic life, and giving them the impression that, hey, unless you're tracking everything meticulously, you're leaving a lot of gains on the table, may cause them to stress and having like actual anxiety about hitting macros like to a T, or logging their training or standardizing everything, and that may even be counterproductive. And this is just speculation from my end, right? It may sometimes be counterproductive to the point where if you're unable to get your 5 sessions in this week exactly how you've planned them, you may decide that, you know what, F it, I'm not doing anything. I wasn't able to get this week in. Or, get a couple of sessions in, and then you're feeling like you're regressing, and that creates a bit of a nocebo around your training, and then you're having another week where you're feeling meh about it. But I think it also comes down to people wanting to be in control and feel like it's the same when I assume people approach you for coaching or approach other known coaches in the field, where they want to go to the person that will give them the exact steps, like that will take them from point A to point B and knows everything and will have the answers for everything. When in reality, you'll give them the blueprint, general guidelines, you'll be there, you'll support them. But at the end of the day, it's not like, no matter how much you track, it's not, you cannot, you may be tracking a ton of variables, your sleep, your stress, this, that, the other, but at the end of the day, you're not, those may not really give you any more control than if you were to track the basics. Same goes with nutrition. Let's say you're tracking your body weight, your waist circumference, and you're paying attention at overall energy intake, protein, and you're making sure you're consuming plenty of whole food so you're getting fiber and micronutrients in. Like if your weight is trending the right way, who says that if you were to like carry a scale with you, things would be different or would be more optimal? Sure, tracking for some people will allow them to be in more control, but that's different, right?
Yeah.
So nobody's saying standardization is useless or you shouldn't do it. I'm just saying that understand how much role it really plays in the ground. Don't miss the forest for the tree and be like, oh, I gotta be doing everything exactly as I've planned, or I have to plan everything and I have to hit that set of 3 to 5. If I do 6 reps or I do 1 less set this week, fuck, I'm missing out on gains. You know, you're probably not.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, because I think it's like that perfectionism almost that people want to have, and that again it draws the same sort of person that wants this perfect prescription. I'm definitely this person where I want science to tell me exactly what I should do, and I know it's optimal. As long as I follow that, well, hey presto, I get the best results. But almost science can't do that. It's much like it should be almost be reassuring that you don't need, there is no optimal like perfect prescription out there. There's many roads that probably work, and probably very similarly, and if one is slightly better, it's probably incredibly marginal versus another one. But same with like nutrition and standardization here. You can't standardize everything in your life, so you're literally like in a vacuum. So if you sleep slightly better one night or worse another night, like those sort of things, yeah, you can control them to some extent, but not perfectly. Or if, you know, one day you have to walk an extra 20 minutes because you ran out of milk, and that's an extra whatever 100 calories expended. Now you're not changing your energy intake to completely perfectly balance that, because you don't need to, because another day you might under kind of expend that amount. So I like to think of these things like standardization in like a range. So like if you're hitting a protein target, it's not like I need to hit 200. It's like maybe it's 180 to 220. Anywhere in that ballpark is pretty spot on, those sort of things. Or my tempo wants to be 3 to 4 seconds or something like that, versus exactly 4 seconds. And if I'm 4.5 or 3.2, I've failed as like a human.
Yeah, exactly. And like I have clients who will, and like I use one in particular, shout out to him. He knows, if he listens to this, he'll tell me, like, where he'll send me a video of him taking a leg press set to failure, like legit to failure, like extreme range of motion, super deep. He'll be like, I think I messed it up a bit with like I locked out for too long on a couple of reps. And I'm like, bro, who cares? Right? Like, you took a set of leg press to failure. It was super deep. You added weight, the end. So yeah, don't miss the forest for the tree sort of situation. And for a lot of people, bro, like they feel overwhelmed by the idea that, oh, I need to track everything, or I don't have leeway, because like we are in this echo chamber of people who absolutely love building muscle, and they will dedicate time and they will read about it. For us, it's our profession. Like, we literally make a living off muscle and strength building and like body composition changes. But a lot of people out there that will consume some of the stuff we put out there, sure, building muscle and getting fitter and bigger and hitting PRs is part of their life, but it's just one part of their life. And when, like, it's the same as like investing, let's say, like very basic savings. Like, if you tell me that I need to become like a expert at stock markets to invest, and that's the only way, or whatever. No, I don't know investing, right? I'll be like, I'm not doing anything. Because it will feel overwhelming. But if you say, here's 5 basic things you can do to make sure you have a pension and you have money aside, and that you can, age and be comfortable financially, then I'll do it. Because I'm like, okay, 5 basic things. Same goes with building muscle, losing fat, and being jacked and strong. And you can be impressively jacked and strong without really, really paying attention to those minute details. And like, I'm saying without paying attention to those minute details, but I'm saying, cool, you have to train hard, use a specific range of motion, plenty of exercises, and do that consistently over 20 years. Like, that's not easy as well, right? Just because it's simple, it's not easy. Same as getting very lean is simple, because it's like, hey, eat less and move, but it's not easy.
Yeah, I think it's almost like, as a coach, and I check in with my clients weekly, like I don't know, I set them up and I just say what you said there, like, see you in 20 years. Like, you have these check-in points, you have these like adherence. And even for myself, like, I like to standardize and have control of variables, because I think, like, if I didn't have that, I would feel kind of lost for a long period of time. So I think it's, you don't want to go too far in one direction. And just, again, I just think of an experience with one of my clients where week 1, he sent me his sets, and his set was a certain length, and he'd progressed it throughout the mesocycle. And it was like the final week before deloading. and he was doing more load, actually no, more reps and more load, but his rep length had decreased significantly. So it's like tempo had completely changed. And it's kind of similar to your comment about like range of motion. Like if you are suddenly doing full ROM to like just partials the entire time, it's like you can't be convinced you know if you've progressed here or have, because you've just made something else easier to get that progress.
Yeah,
so it has to be. So I just wanted to mention it. Like we're not making this argument that standardization full stop is like you don't need it at all. It's like no, it's like you want to be within these ranges.
It's a spectrum, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And yeah, for you specifically, let me ask: do you enjoy being? Do you enjoy the journey and the act of tracking a bunch of stuff? Like, is that enjoyable to you?
Yeah, it's funny. Someone on Threads, which I am on. So if people want to follow me over there, they can. Are you there yet, Pat? No, are you? Can you be there? Yeah, you can be there, right?
Yeah, it was when I saw Threads, it was just anxiety. I was like, oh
no.
man, just another thing.
Yeah.
No.
It just replaced Facebook for me, where I was making status updates over there sometimes. But what was I going to say? I've completely gone off. Oh, yes, now. So yeah, I saw someone make a thread, and they were essentially saying how freeing it was to get away from thinking about optimal for their programming, and like they're really happy with their results and stuff, what have you. And I almost looked at it and I was like, funny. I sometimes look at optimal as like the fun thing, like to try and be optimal. You know what I mean? Like I think some people it causes them stress and anxiety, but for other people, it might be like, oh, I like keeping up with these things and trying to kind of get closer to that optimal type of thing and not stressing too much about it. So same with kind of tracking, like it's something that I kind of enjoy looking at these things. And yeah, I would almost feel lost without it in some way. Like, I don't know how I would be.
And that's totally fine. But people also confuse suboptimal for zero. It's like,
yes,
like for me, my training at the moment, I'd argue for hypertrophy for some muscle groups at least is near optimal because it's enough volume intensity and I am progressing over time. But like suboptimal may mean 98%, and like they don't get that you're still going to be like in the 95th percentile of gym goers if you're training suboptimally, because you can't be asked to like, yeah, it's Saturday night and the optimal thing would be to not go out with your friends. I'm not saying go out and get hammered, but the optimal thing would be to sleep at the same time, wake up at the same time, and so on and so forth. But, you know, you have a life. So just because you did that and now that day was suboptimal, yeah, you didn't get that extra 0.5 or 1%. That probably means nothing to you, average person. Now, if you're a competitive bodybuilder, XYZ, more power to you. Don't go out that Saturday night because that's your whole life. But
yeah, as an acute example, I can think of this. Like, I think there'll be a bunch of people listening who would buy a yoga blocks to put on their shins for leg extensions to get a little bit more range of motion at that long muscle length, or like trying to get towards a longer muscle length for that movement. But like, how much of a difference is that really going to make? Very, very marginal. Fun, but yeah, it's fun. Like trying to find these little hacks, or for like Kasim, trying to manipulate your kind of rib position to get the lats at a longer length. It's like, how much difference is that really going to make for someone's lat growth? Probably not much. Not many people have been training like that for a long time and have huge lats, but it's still something. And it's cool. Fun for people.
Yeah, and when we train at like you could make I go to the gym. The gym is a chain in the UK. Like it's a commercial gym, and I also have a subscription to a powerlifting gym. The gym has a lat pull down, cables, some chest supported machine rows, and that's that. But like, sure, I can make near optimal or optimal gains using those pieces of equipment, but going to like pure fitness and muscle and fitness in Canada, where I had 75 different fucking chest supported row machine options with different like resistant curve profiles and this and that. Sure, it's not necessary, or it may not give me anything much, but I would gladly try the new grip, try the slightly different form, and play around with those things because I'm a muscle and strength geek and I get pleasure from that. But it's important to phrase it that way versus, hey, like if you're not watching 3 videos every day on how to train your lats, you are like you're not getting lats. Like you could do pull-ups, pull-downs, and two more exercises for the rest of your life, progress them, and your back is going to look bigger than the most people going to a commercial gym. So that's the point there. People love the extremes. People love the just train hard, brother, and do rows and overhead press, or the extreme of like, okay, we're now paying attention to every little variable. But again, in the middle. Who's for about? It's not. It doesn't sell though. People don't buy in the middle, right? Like we gotta sell them something extreme. Buy our new Revive Stronger X Dr. Pack podcast program, which is just send us money. There's no problem.
I would almost argue the little nuance differences between coaches in their methodologies really don't add up to much, if anything at all. And the best coaches are the ones that can do what you've mentioned several times through this through this podcast, where it's kind of consistently training hard with enough volume and progressing things over time. Like the coach that can get you doing that is the coach for you, not the one with and maybe some of the fancy nuancy stuff that they do differently sells you on them, and that's what gets you buying, and you do it for longer. That's cool as well, but
that's it.
Like know what you're buying almost.
You said the key word, like create buy-in, and obviously don't be an absolute a-hole with your programming. Like, okay, if you're programming single leg bossable upside down squats, yeah, maybe you're a shitty coach, no matter the buying. But like, if a client buys into a coach and the coach is solid and they're also like a good communicator and they keep them adhering and training hard, I think that's the biggest attribute a coach can have. No matter the PhDs, all that is to create buy-in, in my opinion. Yeah. My PhD was a PhD on minimum dose training. It will create buy-in because people see PhD, but me being a good coach is me getting George or whoever to train hard, manage his training appropriately over a long period of time and get him to buy into what we're doing. Because if they don't buy into it, you may be the best coach, and then you can have coach B come there and say, hey, 3x5. And they go, oh, wow, this is so simple to follow. This is so easy. This is so nice. And then they will make better gains with the suboptimal program or sub-maximal or worse program than yours, simply because they bought into the process.
Yeah, no, I totally see that, because it's an unfortunate thing that I see within our space of like online coaching. I have seen it in the past, and I guess it still happens a fair amount with clients coach hopping. It's like program hopping back in the day. You're just always looking for that best program, and similar with like if you found someone who like seems evidence-based or like they get results with their clients, what have you, like you're probably, and you jive with them, you can communicate well with them. Yeah, I mean, you probably won't hop from them, but you might, because you might be thinking, hey, the results aren't coming fast enough because you have unrealistic expectations or whatever. But yeah, it's a shame when you see that sort of thing happening, because like we kind of mentioned, the differences are so marginal, and it's like you don't know if something's optimal. And it's like you also talked about, it's this kind of optimal versus practical type of thing. I trained at the gym for ages, and I kind of felt shame as someone who was trying to maximize their results as a natural bodybuilder that I wasn't traveling 2 hours to a muscle works in my day, which was just not practical for me when I'm trying to live my life. It's like I was fine making the gains at the gym, and now I'm at slightly kind of better gym maybe, but like I don't think the difference has been night and day. It's
more enjoyable.
Yeah.
If I had a bodybuilding gym, because my gym is like a 20-minute walk from my house, so I can combine it with my walking. But if I had a bodybuilding gym open right next to it, I would go to the bodybuilding gym simply because, hey, new toys to play around with. Oh, this different hammer strength row. I want to build a gym in my basement in Greece, and I'm going to buy hammer strength stuff just for the F of it. I will pay more money just to have fun using equipment that may be a bit more fun to use. But I recognize that I could literally do barbell rows, chin-ups, and like lat prayers, and that would be fine for my back, you know? Yeah. I will, especially at our training ages, right?
Yeah. Awesome. Pac, I don't think I have anything else to discuss on this. I think we covered everything I wanted to here, and hopefully there's been some useful take-homes for people, because this is a bit of a different podcast. A lot of the time we're talking about the research, we're talking about the practical takeaways, we're trying to be optimal, whereas this is a bit of a great podcast for people to listen into. If they've listened to all the others, it might help them understand those better and how to kind of digest them, and for future episodes, and now on social media too, with content being put out there. And maybe they'll be interested in some of these research reviews, including reps, which I'm sure is of a very great quality if it's with Layne Norton and yourself. So is there anything else you want to let the listeners know about, or where should they, if they want to keep up with you and your memes and your hate against people?
That was nice. So sign up to our hate podcast with Milo, Muscle and Feels. So that's actually our podcast with Milo. No hate involved. Don't sue me. Don't cancel me. Linktree / drpak. So Dr. Pack. All my links are there. Thank you for having me on. I really enjoyed this chat. I think this may be my favorite podcast we've done together thus far.
I thought you were almost going to say favorite podcast ever. And I was like, wow, there's a lot of podcasts to be contend with. Okay, we're taking it ever. And in future, there won't be any better either. So anyway, I'll make sure those are all linked below. Thank you for your time, Pak. And we'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Losing weight fast while maintaining muscle mass. Sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? It isn't though. It's reality and we know how to do it. And we will help you achieve this. The Minicut movement is an 8-week fat loss program to make you lose a huge chunk of fat while maintaining muscle mass at the same time. We will support you from the beginning to the end so that you see the results you would like to and come out of it much stronger. You'll receive a fully automated spreadsheet that is based on your nutritional needs. You can choose between 6 different male and female training templates. Over 30 videos will guide you through each and every single step of the Minicut so that you're getting the most out of your journey and that you always know what to do. But the best thing is that you can start whenever you want. The Minicut movement is open 24/7. So if you want to learn more or you're ready to sign up, hit the link in the description below. So let's revive stronger together.